afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the East Tennessee History Center. I'm Dr. Warren Doctor. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting the Brown Bag Lecture. Can I just have a quick show of hand about who's a member of the East Tennessee Historical Society? Most of us. Well, if you're not a member, please join. You're always welcome. We have a lot of fun. We do these sorts of things pretty regularly. Before I introduce our speaker, I'll just tell you about some up-and-coming things. We're really excited because Saturday, the 18th, we are having our Awards of Excellence celebration at lunch in here. It's already sort of fully booked up, but we're really excited to be doing it. It's going to be a lot of fun. But we do still have room later in the day after that. We're having a genealogy workshop at 1 o'clock that day, which will also be here, but there's still room for that if you're interested in sort of learning how to apply for our Tennessee Ancestors program. We also have an event coming up on May 21st at 6 in the evening, which is about caring for family heirlooms so that you can take care of your family's possessions and learning how to care for things and make sure that all the objects are taken care of. On May 29th, we have a lot going on this month. On May 29th, we're having another brown bag, which is called Preserving Appalachian Culture, Recovery and Remediation of Appalachia's Legacy Media Content, which will be very good. And then on June 8th, we're very excited because we'll be doing the downtown home tour on that Saturday. That'll start here, but sort of work all the way through downtown Knoxville. So that's going to be very fun. And if you're interested in architecture or the history of Knoxville and downtown Knoxville, I'd like to encourage you to come. So our speaker today, without further ado, is Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd is a friend of this society. He is an educator and historian in Athens, Tennessee. He works for the McMinn County school system there and is also the president of the McMinn County Historical Society. And as well as he holds several other positions in McMinn County associated with history. He is the author of several books, the first of which was Tennessee Statesman Harry T. Burns, and it won several awards, including awards from us. His second book, Nellie Kenyon, Trailblazing Tennessee Journalist, also won an award from us. And he's here today discussing his most recent book, The Biggs Machine, The Old-Time Politics in Polk County, which in many ways serves as a sort of sequel to the Battle of Athens. And I must say, I read it and really enjoyed it, so I'm really excited to hear what Tyler's got to say. Without further ado, Tyler Boyd. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Warren, and also thank you for the blurb you wrote for the book, so much appreciated. Thank you all for coming out here today with iffy weather. Hopefully it holds off another few hours, but always good to be here, always honored to speak here at ETHS. And I will say that this was, of the three books I've done, this was the most difficult, strenuous to research, but I think it's probably the most fun to talk about. Even more fun than my uncle, because there's always going to be that accusation, it's your family, But still, this right here, I had no dog in the fight when I started this 4 years ago. So this is a lot of fun. You can see here, Polk County, Tennessee. I think this is the county seal. Sugarloaf Mountain, just one of the most, maybe the most beautiful county in the state. You've got Fort Marr for the Native American when they controlled that area before the I think it was the Ocoee Purchase, 1835, before the county was formed. And then you have the Burra Mine, the mining district. The mining industry goes back there over 150 years. And the map on the bottom left, I don't believe that's Polk County's current county commission districts, but I'll show that to you because it's a tale of two counties, if you don't already know. It is very different from both sides, the west side and the east side. Like I said, maybe the most beautiful county in the state. This is the Ocoee River splitting the county, also known as Parksville Lake or Lake Ocoee right there. My earliest memory of going to Polk County was when they had the Olympic trials for whitewater rafting and kayaking, and probably would have been, I guess, 1995, getting ready for the Atlanta Olympics, and I would have been in third grade, and all I remember is they took us there and said, look, this is the best athletes in the world practicing for the Olympics right down in Atlanta. All we want to do is skip rocks in the river. We didn't have any interest in watching the kayakers, but little did I know I'd write about this area. So Well, here is the protagonist of this story. This book, like the previous two, is a biography, and although it's about a community and the impact politics had on it, he's still the main character, the driving force of this story. And in the text I had to say Burch instead of Biggs because he has two sons who also served as sheriff, and if I use a surname it's going to get really confusing. But this is a man right here, about 70 years old. Give you perspective on his lifetime. He was born the same year as Winston Churchill and President Herbert Hoover, son of Thomas Temple Biggs and Eunice Adeline Addie Kimbrough, grandson of pioneer settler Polk County William Biggs, settler of the Ocoee District, which was bought from Native Americans in 1835 and later formed Bradley County and then Polk County. And then he became a deputy sheriff in 1898. Served 3 terms as Polk County Sheriff, off and on in the early 1900s, when he was actually a really good lawman. I think he was very gifted in this realm. He had good instincts, he was fearless, and if he was honest then or not honest then, there were enough checks and balances to keep him in control then. And also he had 2 stints as Etowah police chief, including the first year Etowah was incorporated. Etowah came out of nowhere as an Illinois Railroad boomtown in 1909. He was police chief there. So the prologue of the book kind of gives you an idea of his early career and life in Polk County, and kind of explains how the county is and everything. And it doesn't really get going until 1930 when the man's already in his mid-50s, so he's already late middle age when this really gets going. A little bit of some pictures from early on in his career and his life. It seems like a lot of counties in Tennessee have courthouses standing today that some have really beautiful architecture. They really do. Like I think Monroe County, I think Ray County, and then there's others a little more modern, Bradley County, McMinn County, that just, in my opinion, aren't quite as aesthetically pleasing. And Polk County is one of those too. So it seems like a lot of these counties, they peaked in their aesthetically pleasing courthouses in the late 19th century. So this right here is Polk County's 3rd courthouse, built in 1897, destroyed by fire in 1935. So this is Burch Biggs' early days in politics. This was the courthouse. And there was a fire that burned this courthouse down in the mid-1930s, and one of my best sources for this book, who has since passed away, told me who set the fire. He's probably right, but I decided not to put that in the book just to kind of be nice to the descendants, but he's probably right. So when he told me the guy's name, I'm like, yeah, it probably was him, So, but on the right, you'll see Burch Biggs. He's on the left, now 6'2", green eyes, and his, not green eyes, blue eyes. On the right there was his first chief deputy, a man named Gus Barkley. Now remember that name, Barkley, and it's pronounced Barkley, like Charles Barkley, but it's spelled like Barclay, B-A-R-C-L-A-Y. When I first went to research this in the county, people are like, "You're looking for Robert Barkley? Who are you talking about?" "Oh, I mean Barclay. Oh, you mean Bob Barkley." So that's what it is. So his first chief deputy, Gus Barkley, in the early 1900s. There's not a whole lot of text or charts in this, but I do have a few slides. I want to kind of set up the history of this county to put all this into context to show just how this machine got to be as powerful as it was. Polk County was formed in 1839. They were one of 6 pro-Confederate counties in East Tennessee. Before the Civil War, they voted to succeed in 1861. And like I said, with it being a tale of 2 counties, you have below the mountain, which is the west, really the northwest area, where Benton is and Highway 411, that area. And, like the libraries or the fire stations will say east and west Polk, but really it's below the mountain and above the mountain. Above the mountain, which is mostly the Copper Basin, generally supported the Union, but they were outvoted by the farming communities below the mountain. Democrats controlled the county government until 1894. Then it truly became purple. The registration between the 2 parties is almost equal, and most of the local offices and even the state elections were very, very close. We're talking single-digit margins for the winners. Between Reconstruction and the turn of the century, the 2 parties split in votes for president, and the Democrats carried the county by a small majority in the elections for governor, 7 out of 11. But then, starting around the turn of the century, Republicans carried the county in every presidential election and all but 3 gubernatorial contests. So you can see this isn't really a county of extremes. You know, this is truly a politically moderate county. Then we get to where this really starts in the election of 1930. Burch Biggs is in his mid-50s. He's already had 3 terms as sheriff off and on. He lives in Etowah, and if you don't know, Etowah is very close to Polk County in southeast McMinn County. He was police chief there. There's a few episodes of his time there as police chief that don't really reflect well on him as a chief. But he had a farm on the Hiwassee River. So if you are driving on 411 South through Polk County, you will see a big farm. I think I have a picture here. I'll show you it a little later. There's a big farm on the right. It is now occupied by 2 different businesses. The Chilhowie Glider Port. They'll take you on hang gliding trips. I could never do that at Fair Heights. And there's also Supersod, which used to be Mid-10 Turf. And apparently Supersod, I guess there may be a franchise all over the area. And that farm was in his family for a long time. He owned part of it. So he had, you know, ownership of land in the area. But the way it's supposed to be when it comes to voting and running for office, you're supposed to vote and run for office where you lie your head. He lied his head in Etowah all the way until 1930. So he runs, he's nominated by the Polk County Democrats in the spring of 1930, despite not living there. And he's elected over William Oliver Harrison, the incumbent Republican sheriff. And to give you an idea of how much things changed, he was the last Republican elected sheriff until the 1980s, because you had the Good Government League, which is a bipartisan group, so there were no Republicans elected sheriff there for over 50 years. He won by 131 votes. If you look at the county contest, you know, you had sheriff, the 2 court clerks, the trustee, the register of deeds, the county judge. Of course, Vance Davis was the winner of that election. And you had the races for governor, or the primaries for governor. It was a split, you know. Democrats won 3, Republicans won 3. But and if you look at the precinct breakdown, it's all pretty close. So there's 1 precinct in Conasauga in southwest Polk County, very close to the Georgia line. It's really an anomaly there. Biggs and all the Democrats won by I think they won 81% of the vote. And that's where they said this was the vote grab of 1930, which was emulated by Paul Cantrell in 1936. Of course, Paul Cantrell defeated in the Battle of Athens. Evidence shows that Paul Cantrell learned this tactic from Burch Biggs. If you have a close election, all it takes is 1 precinct, and you've got it. But the thing is, you know, how they can keep themselves in there. Are they going to accept the results of the next time? Are they going to steal it? Well, you know, we're going to find out. But Harrison accuses Burch of fraud and alleges his candidacy was ineligible because he did not live in Polk County, he lived in Etowah. The circuit court upheld Burch's election, and then the Supreme Court heard it. And I looked at all those papers, and there was a deposition, and Biggs talked about how I'll move some furniture to some house I have on the farm. But the Supreme Court decided to let him stay, and remember that too, because there's more court cases later that's going to be in Volume 2. But this was adjudicated, it took 15 months. So it wasn't until November 1931 he was confirmed as a sheriff, although he was still acting as sheriff. So he's in there now. Okay, maybe it won't be so bad. You know, he lost in 1908 and accepted the results and went back to the farm, went back to policing, and then he lost in 1916. He went back to the farm. But is he going to do this again? We'll find out. So I wanted to define a political machine because it can get thrown around a lot, and I think the context of this really matters because you have urban machines like the Crump machine in Memphis, the Dailies in Chicago. We've all heard of Boss Tweed in New York. There's the Long Dynasty in Louisiana. I don't know if it's Prendergast in St. Louis, of course, which was associated with Senator, later President Truman. But for these purposes, this is just my definition of what I would say a political machine is. Think of it as a tripod. It takes 3 points of pressure to maintain your balance. Election fraud, graft, police brutality, and if there's one more leg to keep you even more secure in your power, it's undemocratic rule and lack of accountability. I'm going to go over examples of all four of these because there's tons of examples in this story, but I certainly want to go into detail. Need to distinguish between election fraud and voter fraud. I always like to tell people, like, somebody can just go in and, vote twice, or maybe they're from a different state. One person does, that's voter fraud. But election fraud is something that's wholesale. And it's not possible without control of the ballot boxes. Because, as we all know, states conduct elections. The legislature appoints election commissions for every county. Election commissions hire all election workers. They appoint all officers of election, which is the chief of the precinct. They handle all of the other regulations. And there's just not any way you can steal an election in a county or even a state without that kind of control. And this is the kind of control that Burch Biggs had because Tennessee was a blue state at the time. But there's more to it than that. I'll get into some more details later. But that's something to remember. Graft, getting rich off of the taxpayers. He had all sorts of ways to get rich off of the taxpayers, and of course it's nothing new, but this is exceptional because you'll find out later no one ever left office in Polk County as rich as him, and no one went in as poor as him either. But one example is overcharging the county for jail expenses. That's probably the most common one. At this time, there was a public act, a state law, applied to every county. The sheriff and all the other, trustee, court clerk, etc., fee offices, they had a salary cap for their county. Polk County, of course, is a Class C, it is very small. $5,000 a year. That's not bad back then. You can get by with that. Any excess collected for fees, for if the trustee's processing something, the court clerk gets you some papers you need, or the sheriff arrests you and they take you to jail, turnkey fee, they feed you, boarding fees and all that. Anything in excess of that goes to pay your deputies, who also have a cap on their wages, and anything in excess of that is supposed to go to the county treasury. Well, what Biggs did was, and I've looked at the paperwork here, and I've also looked at some audits and some court cases about this in the state Supreme Court, he overcharged the county. If you know the county's population, and if you've seen the size of that jail, he overbooked the jail. He charged them for having 90 prisoners, and there were really only 30 there, and he pocketed the difference and only reported having paid for having 30 prisoners. Now, did other sheriffs maybe do this in the past in other counties? I'm sure they did, but this went on for 18 years, okay? Because he stayed in office through election fraud and police brutality. Of course, we all know police brutality. We have to give an example of that. And then undemocratic rule and lack of accountability. I'm going to try to give you an example of that one too. Now, only two charts here, but I want to show the changes in Polk County's election results over time. And there's really no better baseline than the turn of the century. I couldn't find some of these, but just take a look at the race for president. Remember, this is going to be for president at this time, mostly Republicans. In 1912, Wilson won the three-person race between Taft and Teddy Roosevelt. And if you look at the congressman, it was the incumbent Democrat from Chattanooga winning, and the governor, of course, that kind of went back and forth between the two different parties. But look at the margins for the first 20 years of the 20th century. It's fairly competitive. The winners are winning in the mid to high 50% range. There's one outlier in 1914 for Congress because the incumbent congressman had an independent candidate, probably not well funded. Other than that, it's pretty typical. Now, things are going to change. Got the next 20 some odd years of Polk County's political results. It's still competitive. Now, you'll see a jump in 1928. Hoover was very popular. He had one of the few true blowouts, along with Harding and LBJ and Nixon the second time around, and Reagan second time around. It's believable. No other counties had any results any different. He did well everywhere. And then we look at 1932. FDR, of course, he's popular. He gets a pretty big percentage there. Not really an outlier. Well, then 1934, Biggs has been in for 2 terms. He's got a 3rd term. He's getting more power. And all of a sudden, the congressman, Sam McReynolds from Chattanooga, he's getting 80% of the vote. And then look at 1936. I could not find that one, but And then look at the congressman results in 1938. It gets up into the 90s. By 1940, the Congressman McReynolds is deceased, and the new Congressman from Chattanooga is Burch Biggs' cousin, Estes Kefauver. Estes Kefauver's great-grandfather and Burch Biggs' grandmother were siblings. So they were pretty close cousins, and they were very close. And look at the president. FDR does about what you'd expect him to do, but then by 1940, he gets 87%. I mean, he's popular, wartime, not quite wartime, but, Depression-era president. I can believe in winning some of that, but let's look at the other counties. I can't show it to you here, but if you look at FDR and other counties in 1940, it's nowhere close to this. Even the bluest of blue counties, like Davidson and Shelby and all those other counties back then, Madison. And then in 1944, if you recall, that's FDR's worst showing in his 4 races. He ran against a pretty good candidate in Dewey, who almost beat Truman 4 years later until he did it. 93%. That's a little hard to believe. And then look at the governor race, too. Remember, Polk County, of all the races in Polk County, for state or federal, governor was the most competitive. And then all of a sudden you've got, who's this? Prentice Cooper. Good governor, by the way. Prentice Cooper, 1938, gets 88% of the vote, and then the same in 1940, 1942, jumps to 98%. And then Jim McCord, 95%, 1944. These are statistical anomalies, and the explanation for this is election fraud. He had his nephew, that would be, I always thought it was his wife's nephew. No. It was his sister's kid, Hoyt Lillard. Hoyt was the election commission chairman, and he was appointing all these deputies, Burch Biggs' deputies, who had guns on them during the election to work the elections. They would not let people see the count. There were accounts in the newspapers. There were affidavits written, letters sent to Congressman John Jennings from here in Knoxville. His papers are at the Howard Becker Center at UT. And I talked to a lot of people who remembered this, some people in their 80s and 90s. I talked to some of their children who told them stories about how these elections were stolen. And but all you have to do is look at these results and realize something's not quite right here. And it went on for so long that when it came to local elections in 1940, the Republicans had given up. They weren't even going to try to run anymore. Why waste time? So he ran unopposed from 1940, 42, and 44 in the local elections. Like I said, this was for one of my, I probably talked to at least 3 dozen people for this book, and there were maybe about 10 or so that wanted to remain anonymous, and of course, a lot of them live in the county and, still want to have a social life, because some people, unfortunately, can't get along with someone because their papaw did something to their papaw, 75 years ago. But this person, she's the one that said he went into office in debt and died a millionaire. And it's a good line, so I decided to use it here for the presentation. But she lived right there in the courthouse square, so I know she knows what she's talking about. She turned 90 this year, and she's still sharp as a tack. So he had a river bottom farm, which is an expression for a very fertile soil, a very valuable farm. He says, I inherited this. There's a whole article in the Knoxville newspaper from 1943. He shows the reporter his farm, and he's so proud of it. Well, I don't know if y'all knew this, but back then, people had a lot of kids. A lot of kids. Burch Biggs had 7 siblings, and his father and mother, his father had several siblings, and his grandfather did. How did one person out of how many grandkids? 50 grandkids? End up with this farm? Well, he bought it. I go to check the register of deeds, and there was even a lawsuit when a cousin of his actually sued over it, and he still won that. In his comeback in 1930, he had 2 mortgages. That's been confirmed with the Register of Deeds office. He was in debt. His Hiwassee River farm he inherited from his dad in 1906, had 90 acres, which, by the way, was about the average size of a farm in Polk County at this time, in the early 20th century, when we were still an agricultural nation. By the time of his death in 1954, his farm is 741 acres, all on a sheriff's salary. Oh, he was a farmer during the Depression. Yeah, they weren't exactly rolling in dough, okay? He also owned several rental properties and several hundred acres of farmland across the county. Just check the Polk County tax books. You can see B, Biggs, all sorts of property over the years, increasing more. I decided to check the property holdings for sheriffs before and after him. None of them had this much wealth they left office. Here's his farm. Of course, not a very good picture. I wish I could get one from the sky, but then I'd have to, there's rights issues and a drone and all that. So, but this is the mid-10 or the super sod and the Hiwassee Glider Port there on the Hiwassee River. Just a beautiful farm, just a couple miles north of Benton. So, I'm going to introduce you to a little bit more of the county before I continue. This is a great photograph of Benton from the era of the 1950s. This is the county seat. Currently the largest city. Back in the Biggs days, Copper Hill was a little bit bigger. But you have the courthouse. If you can see on there where it says snack bar, and then a little bit to the above that it says jail, his house was between the snack bar and the jail, facing Main Street. And multiple sources told me this, including a magazine that was contemporaneous. He hooked up his house to the county's water line. The same water line that fed the courthouse fed his house. He didn't have to pay for a water bill. His nephew, Hoyt Lillard, had the Lillard grocery store on the left side of the courthouse near Benton Station Road. You can see they had the bank over there near the jail and the movie house. At one time, Burch Biggs' nephew, Hoyt Lillard, his right-hand man, probably my least favorite person in the store that's not a murderer, so how's that for a distinction, huh? At one time, Hoyt Lillard was the chairman of the election commission, chairman of the draft board, chairman of the school board, and the president of the Benton Banking Company. That's power. Benton, mostly farm families, this is the below the mountain area. A lot of the political power is here because it's a county seat, but there's a little bit of a struggle to this day. There's still a rivalry and a divide between above and below the mountain because unless you want to ride on the Kimsey Highway, which is like a 3-hour leisurely ride on a crappy road, you're going to take the River Road, US Highway 64, over to the Copper Basin, which back then was not a fun ride, to get to the other side of the county. And they felt like they were left out on some things. So above the mountain, East Polk, you have the Copper Basin, and the heart of the basin is Ducktown. This is a great photograph, and remember, because of the mining industry in the early days, they would roast the copper, open roasting, just out there, and that caused acid rain, and it killed most of the vegetation in the area. And it affected this area of the county for several decades, and they started doing reclamation in, I think, around like 1930s or 40s in the Biggs era. And now they have pine trees and kudzu, so at least they have something. But they have hardly any vegetation. You can see a few little trees here and there, bushes, but nothing major. It's like Los Angeles, But one person did tell me, he sadly passed away since then too, since I started the book. But he said, yeah, I never had a sniffles or anything because there wasn't any pollen to bother me. He's like, well, that's something. But the Ducktown is where the mines were, the mining industry, of course, and they were. That was the county's bread and butter. They were by far, well, you had the Tennessee Electric Power Company, but they were later bought out by TVA. So after that, the Tennessee Copper Company was the largest taxpayer in the county, and they did whatever they needed to do to keep whoever was in power happy. And there's Copper Hill. It's really unusual if you don't know, but Copper Hill is pretty much a joint city with McKaysville, Georgia, but they have the different names. It's kind of like Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia, and Kansas City, and Missouri. The river, if you look at what's below the river, that's not all McKaysville, because some of McKaysville is actually north of the river. You would think the state line would be along the river. No, it's just that parallel. But this is Copper Hill because it's on a hill. You can see the company housing up there. And the Copper Company office, I think, is on the upper left part of the photograph. And you can see the Copper Hill High School on the upper right of the photograph. That's the Coy River. This is where the Copper Company offices were and the mining industry. Most people in the Copper Basin, unless they were diehard Democrats, hated Burch Biggs, and it wasn't personal. They did not like his ways, his dishonest ways, and he did what he needed to do to keep them in line. Now, police brutality. I'll start with this one because you have a string of murders starting here. Not all of them are police brutality. Now, a lot are. There were multiple people killed by his deputies, questionably at best and unjustifiably at worst. But this one started a string of murders where the murderer becomes a murder victim, on and on and on, ending in 1958. This is 1936, so 22 years. It's just a string of murders. David McFadden is a road contractor from North Carolina. He's working on paving the U.S. Highway 64, part of the Great Depression Works project for the federal government. And of course, the Biggs deputies are shaking him down for money. Typical stuff political machines do. Deputy Emmett Gaddis, who was from Cherokee County, North Carolina, he was working as a deputy there in the Cumber Basin. They got into a scuffle in 1935. McFadden trying to defend himself, and Gaddis pulls out a gun, and he shoots McFadden in the mouth. It goes through his shoulder. Well, then we'll fast forward to Christmas Eve, I think, about a month later. Gaddis is at his house in a little community that's about gone now, Isabella, just outside of Ducktown, just a little hamlet. In the middle of the night, he hears someone saying, "Emmett, Emmett, Emmett." So he gets up and goes to the door. Before he gets to the door, it's just like that. The shotgun just goes right through his shoulder. And of course, it's not a fatal wound. But remember, this is a man not of means in 1935 in Isabella, Tennessee, who says he identified positively the shooter, and it was McFadden. All he had was a little lantern. I'm skeptical, very skeptical of that. So with that scant evidence, Burch Biggs, of course, has a lot of influence. The grand jury indicts Dave McFadden for murder. McFadden was a good man, also very stubborn. He was told not to go through Polk County before his murder trial, but he did anyways, and this car followed him, and they shot him up. So his car's right here, and then Gaddis and his buddies are up on a sort of a high, they have elevation over him, and they shoot into his car. He gets out, and he has his hands up, and there's witnesses everywhere. You would have thought they would have done this somewhere where there's not any witnesses. They did this right there on the federal highway, and they killed him. Well, Gaddis killed him, and Gaddis is acquitted. And that's the first of many awful acquittals for someone who was clearly guilty. And the judge in this trial was a new judge who had been a lawyer. You may have heard of him, Sue K. Hicks, a boy named Sue, from the Scopes trial. And there was evidence of substantial evidence of jury tampering, yet Judge Hicks did absolutely nothing. So here's the road that McFadden was driving on, and then Gaddis and his buddies went ahead of him, got the high ground, shot and killed him. And then this is a photograph of the Chattanooga newspaper, the bullet holes in his car. Like I said, Gaddis was killed, and then the guys that killed Gaddis got killed, so on and so forth, in 1958. So this really started a culture of violence in Polk County that persisted for a long time. That was their style of conflict resolution, and vendettas and settling old scores, things like that. And this I consider the turning point of the Biggs era. I really do, this murder. Skullduggery. So the last pillar of the machine I'm going to discuss is, I remember I said undemocratic rule and lack of accountability. So these are clippings from probably Chattanooga, Knoxville newspapers, I think maybe Cleveland. Well, why is it saying this? Why is it saying Bradley County citizens denounce Biggs' plan to rule county? Bradley plans map of action against Biggs. Jurors may probe Bradley warning. What? Jury probing? What's that all about? What's skullduggery? So here's what happened. And it's not the most fun thing to try to discuss. I'll do my best. Tennessee did not have home rule until 1953, meaning cities did not have a lot of autonomy over their own affairs. They couldn't have charters. I think it's a little different with Nashville now because it's a metro. You got the capital there and things get political. We've seen that. But before we had home rule in the 1950s, if you had the county court, which is now like the county commission, the county court with justices of the peace, the JPs, let's say you have 10 of them, all elected in their districts. The city may elect a mayor, in the city government. The state legislature had the power to pass a bill to remove duly elected JPs or city council or city commission members, kick them out of office, and replace them with hand-picked successors. And this was done almost as a matter of course. It's just kind of hard to wrap your head around the way things were. And I know it may have made sense when Tennessee was a frontier state, and our state constitution actually was unaltered between the Civil War, well, Reconstruction, and 1953. So it may have made sense way back in the old days, but they had the power to do this. And the local person, as long as it's local, as long as someone from that county, proposed this bill, oh, it's fine, and all of them, the majority of them would vote for it, So that's what happened. The Cantrells had control of McMinn County, Democrats in Republican County, Monroe County, which was really a purple county, but they had a Democratic control who was getting to be a little bit of a problem. His name was W. Breakable. And of course, Biggs had Polk County. Well, they wanted to get more of East Tennessee, Southeast Tennessee, so they're going to go for Bradley County, which has always been a very, very red county. They passed a bill to get rid of all the duly elected, well, not all, there were a few people there that liked Biggs, but most of the duly elected justices of the peace, and replaced them with people who weren't even elected. Bradley Countyans had none of this. They went up to the homes of the newly appointed JPs, knocked on the door at night, and a group of them, we're talking about, people in this room, all of us just go up to the guy's front door and just leave a message. You tell the wife, hey, tell your husband that if he doesn't resign within 1 week, we consider him a henchman of Burch Biggs or else. Now, they get away with this in Bradley County because Burch Biggs does not have the gun. He does not have the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office is controlled by the Republicans, or it doesn't even matter, controlled by someone not under his thumb. It could have been a Democrat, someone not under his thumb in Polk County, or in Bradley County, okay? So they're able to fight back as best they can against this, and Biggs could not retaliate because it was not his jurisdiction. He did not have any allies there in the sheriff's office. So eventually, these guys were confronted at a county court meeting, and they got scared and went home. There was no quorum. And eventually, a few of them resigned, and Bradley County showed you can fight back against this guy. But, the grand jury is like, oh, we're going to investigate this. I'm thinking, oh, geez, okay. Yeah. And they called it skullduggery. And the Chattanooga Daily Times called this skullduggery. This is a staunchly Democratic newspaper, but they wanted to win fairly, not through fraud or undemocratic methods like Ripper bills. Well, Bradley County citizens made their voices heard in Nashville. They sent telegrams to Governor Prentice Cooper, of all the governors in the Biggs era who signed in legislation helping Biggs and Cantrell and the rest of them get power. He's the only one that showed a conscience. That's why I like this guy. He was a good wartime governor, but Crump was in charge. He had all the Memphis delegation votes in his hand. That's a huge, chunk of votes in the legislature, and you got to make him happy. Crump wanted this because Biggs and Cantrell did him favors here, so Cooper's like, I'm sorry, I have to sign some of these or I won't get my agenda done. He had a pretty good agenda, but, he had to play politics. So this is, if you guys have ever heard of Hardwick Stove, Hardwick Clothes, Hardwick is one of the biggest industrial families in the history of Bradley County, Tennessee. Very, very successful entrepreneurial family. They wrote a telegram to the governor asking him, do not sign any bills that changes our city or county form of government. We like it the way it is. We chose these people. Please help us. And then the editor of the Cleveland Herald, a Democratic paper. Our boys are dying on the battlefield of the world fighting for the freedoms that are a basic belief of our country, which have long been upheld by our president. We citizens of Cleveland and Bradley County do not want to lose our freedom here at home. As a man in close touch with the people of the city and county, I know that our people do not want any changes made in either the form of our county or city government in the present officials. I urge that you sign no bills which could make any changes of this kind here. Someone from the PTA at Charleston High School, which is now, Walker Valley, they have a high school down there now. Condition of Bradley County critical. Will there be school? Well, maybe not, because the county court can't meet because the JPs that were appointed to office are being intimidated and they can't have a quorum to do business, all because of Burch Biggs. And even the Church of God, the literal ward headquarters of the Church of God is in Cleveland, Tennessee. This guy, the general overseer of the Church of God, even wrote to the governor. Just like in McMinn County, when the ministers start writing to politicians, you know it's bad. Here's the Biggs dynasty before we get to the downfall. Burch Biggs, I had to do this because, bless him, the newspapers, B.E. Biggs. And then when Broughton became sheriff, it's B.E. Biggs Jr. No, it's not. His name is Broughton Euclid Biggs. not Burch Euclid Biggs Jr. His name was Broughton Euclid Biggs. They called him B. Biggs Jr. And then Sheriff Burch Biggs. And no, it's Burch G. Biggs. It's Burch Glenn Biggs. So that's why I had to put in the book Burch, Broughton, Burch Glenn to differentiate the three of them. But as you can see, they held office for 18 straight years, and they held office for 24 out of 44 years. And we have one guest here whose uncle was sheriff of Polk County, Bill Davis. He was sheriff for 24 years, and I'm very glad he was sheriff that long because he got to break Burch Biggs' record. So that makes me feel good. But Burch is seated here with his wife, Della Lillard. When he married her, Lillard's like the biggest name in Polk County, really. He got related to a third of the county through the marriage. Top left is Burch Glenn Biggs, World War II veteran, strapping man. He was called Beefy as a young man because he was kind of chubby and he liked to eat and he was kind of a glutton. And his daughter that survived to adulthood, Eileen Biggs Bryant, she lived in Cleveland a long time. She's there in the middle. And then you have Broughton Biggs, who was the older of the two sons, who also served as sheriff there on the top right. Broughton was smart. He idolized his dad, and I think if he hadn't had the influence of his crooked father, I think he would have been a really good sheriff. But his dad, they steered him down the wrong path. And another neat Winston Churchill connection, may not mean anything, but Burch Biggs' daughter here, the youngest daughter, Eileen, was born in 1922, his youngest child. The same year, Mary Churchill, was her name Soames? Yes. Mary Soames was born that same year. So both of these guys had a daughter in their late 40s in 1922, but still, not comparing Churchill to Biggs, but still, it's just a neat, similarity. Now we have the beginning of the end, the Battle of Athens. Of course, this was a great photograph. It may be from Getty's, don't tell them I used it, but beautiful photograph here of the aftermath. And remember Burch Biggs' chief deputy in his early days, Gus Barkley. Well, Gus Barkley was killed in a duel. Yes, a duel in Copper Hill in 1913, like the Old West. I mean, I thought I was reading the script of a Clint Eastwood movie or something. It actually happened. Well, his son, Robert Edward Barkley, who went by Bob Barkley, was a Tennessee Copper Company employee, amateur historian, wrote a book about the Ducktown mining industry. He had not really been that political. He's spoken out a few times. I want better schools, I want better roads. He wouldn't really go as far to criticize Biggs. He had no support. You can't blame him. He's scared. After the Battle of Athens, he writes a column in the Copper City Advance, the other paper in the county. A second Declaration of Independence in Athens was written on Election Day last week. It's bound to happen all over the United States. And he goes into talk about the Southland and Dixie and all that kind of stuff, because he's a Democrat too. But the thing is, he's ready to overthrow Burch Biggs. He knows it's possible because the Battle of Athens was successful. He contacted the members of the GI Nonpartisan League of McMinn County to get advice on forming the Polk County Good Government League. He brought together a coalition of the anti-Biggs Democrats, the honest Democrats like Vance Davis, who was the first person to really try to take Biggs down but didn't have enough support back in the 1930s. He had to team up with him. He had to team up with other Democrats who didn't like Biggs, like the Lowry family, Republicans, independents, people that didn't usually pay attention to politics. A really remarkable job he did of building a coalition together to take this man down. And they started in 1946, November of that year, 3 months later, when they got Frank Lowry elected to the state legislature to represent Bradley and Polk, because they've always been in the same state house district. He got there and he got some bills passed to help the Good Government League get more power to keep Biggs in check. And it was sort of a tug of war there for a couple of years. Then we had the 1948 election. There was no better paper, not Chattanooga, not Knoxville, not Athens, of course not the hometown papers, they were biased as it gets. The Cleveland Daily Banner did an outstanding job of covering this election. Guardsmen take over Benton. Violence flares as Polk County counts its votes. Good Government League says Burch Biggs, they spelled his name wrong. He hated that, by the way. If you think, see, Harry T. Burns, when you said Harry T. Burns, he didn't care. Harry T. Burns Jr. hated that. He'd get mad at you. Burch Biggs, you spelled his name with an I, it hurt his feelings a little bit. And I'm thinking, that's what hurt your feelings? But it's B-U-R-C-H, okay? He says, I'm a man, I'm not a tree, all right? But so this is the 1948 election. Well, the Battle of Athens had no casualties. This did. The Good Government League had poll watchers everywhere. They had a really good candidate. They had a Democrat for sheriff, John Edwards. They had Republican for tax assessor, and they had a Democrat for trustee, and they had equal amount of Democrats and Republicans for the JPs and the constable races, and the school board races as well. But on that election day, there were 3 fatalities. 2 in Turtletown, which if you don't know is just north of Ducktown on Highway 68. If you keep going, you get to Coker Creek in Monroe County and then Tellico Plains. And another one in Ducktown, right outside the voting precinct there. These may not have been political. I may never know. I got a few names, nothing, certainly nothing's proving it, but it may have been an excuse to settle old scores and they could blame it on politics. I don't know, but there were 3 deaths. Governor McCord had been criticized for not sending in the National Guard during the Battle of Athens. So when he heard that this happened, he wasted no time, but also Sheriff Burch Biggs, who was 31 years old, give you an idea of the stress. I won't spoil anything for you, but to give you an idea of the stress Burch Biggs caused his sons being sheriff. Burch Glenn, remember, this is a 6'4", strapping World War II veteran. He did not see combat, nothing against that, but he never served, he never left the country, so he didn't quite have the stress as a lot of combat veterans. And he's 31 years old. He's in the hospital recovering from a heart attack at age 31. But he has to call the governor, and the governor's, I'm happy to send in the Guard and the Highway Patrol. Now, these are photographs from the Etowah Enterprise, a now defunct newspaper. Thankfully, there's no rights issues. I'm so happy. But this is the best pictures there are. But the guardsmen, these kids, some of them weren't even 18 yet. They graduated high school. They hadn't turned 18 yet in August. And poor souls are going to go to Korea in a couple of years. They didn't know that. But they were sent down to Polk County to see that the trouble stops immediately. And there's gun confiscations. Now, of course, if you know Polk County and their culture, you're not going to get all the guns there, not even today, not even close. But they tried to do what they could to put on the appearance of confiscating the guns, mostly from people living on the town square and the known troublemakers, and they went to the hardware store, the gun stores, things like that, and took them all to the courthouse, put everybody's name on them, you get them back in a week or so and calm things down. The ballot boxes, for years, Burch Biggs and his election workers, his deputies, they would transport ballot boxes along the River Road from the Copper Basin, and they broke the law. You're supposed to have one Democrat, one Republican who worked the election in the car. They didn't do that. A lot of times they dumped them in the Ocoee River. I had 3 people tell me that. Either they or their father remembered it, and the Good Government League made sure, especially after those murders, that the ballot boxes from Ducktown and Copper Hill were transported in a caravan of multiple cars that night, and they made sure they got to Benton safely. And now some of them got shot at, but no one died. This one guy got his neck cut with the glass shattering. So the Guard is guarding the ballot boxes in the courthouse, and they confiscated a lot of the guns, things that got to calm down over the weekend, and they're going to have the election count. Henry Crocs. Don't have a lot of favorite characters here. He's one of my closest to being my favorite character. Just a salt of the earth man from Bradley County. He was, I think he ran against Biggs as a Republican in 1934 and got crushed. But him and his family were great folks, and he was election commissioner for years, appointed by the legislature, and then he had Biggs' nephew and the other guy, and he was never included in the meetings, he was always outvoted, and he tried everything he could to keep honest elections. Well, he is carrying the ballot box upstairs to the circuit courtroom on the very top floor to get ready to do the vote count. And everyone in that room had a National Guard escort with a gun, and he looks pretty scared. Just in case any of the big supporters from below the mountain, because for some reason the farmers and the people in the mountain district, Reliance, Greasy Creek, Springtown, out there in the middle of the county where the mountains are, where it's very remote. They love the guy. I don't know why. So just in case they decided to raid the courthouse with their shotguns and take back the county for the old sheriff, The National Guard had I think that's the M1 Garand, also known as the Ma Deuce, who could mow those people down with one shot on all four corners of the courthouse lawn to make sure nothing happened. And they called Biggs Burch the old sheriff because, remember, he had his son Broughton B. Biggs Jr. and then Burch Glenn, the sheriff. They had to differentiate. He's the old sheriff, you know. So, and here is the climax of this story: the vote count. You've got 5 guys right there. It's kind of hard to see them. You got Bob Barkley. He has on a white shirt and maybe like a checkered tie. He's 4th from the left. And then you have the sheriff candidate, John Edwards. He's facing to the left, and he has a receding hairline. And then you see the guy sitting at the table, facing the camera with slick back hair and glasses. That's Hoyt Lillard, Burch's nephew. And you have Henry Crox at the head of the table on the left. And then you have a man named Cass Gear, not from Polk County. He's from Middle Tennessee, lawyer, came to help out Biggs. His back is to the camera. So remember, there's 3 murders on Election Day. The ballot boxes in Copper Hill and Ducktown, which is the biggest outside of Benton, are brought in a caravan. Not everyone was an election worker, but they were people to make sure there was no ballot tampering, including Barkley. And Hoyt Lillard starts complaining, I don't want to certify these returns, because these were not brought over by the election workers. And he had no complaints about that the previous 18 years when his uncle did that. Well, if you know Bob Barkley, the GGL leader, he was a very unusual man. I didn't know him. He's been dead, 40 years, but it didn't seem like a particularly likable guy. Intellectual for sure, maybe not the most affable person, but he was a very good speaker. He got people fired up, but he was fearless. And he said, I should have mentioned each party, the Democrats and the GGL, had 5 poll watchers in the room. And you have 3 journalists and 3 election commissioners. Double that, that's 16, so 32 people, because you have 16 guardsmen with a gun, they're all in there. Make sure nothing happens. And one of the guardsmen was told by his commanding officer, if anybody tries anything in there, you bop them on the head with your nightstick, with your billy club, whatever. So Hoyt Lillard doesn't want to sign these. It's a 3-man commission. All it takes is two to block certified results. Hoyt says, I don't want to sign these. And then Barkley hadn't spoken. They're there for hours. Barkley says, are you going to certify these returns, or are you, Mr. Lillard? And then Hoyt said, I don't know. I want to do what's right and what is legal. And Barkley says, all you want to do is what they have ordered you to do. And then another guy, who was one of the Biggs candidates, said, we would have won if it hadn't been stolen from us. And then Barkley, what do you mean stolen from us? All we did was make sure a bunch of your thugs did not take a ballot box and the lights were cut off at Ducktown, and someone was shot and killed. So Barkley's furious, but things calm down. And then finally, somebody, the guy that's back to the camera, Cass Gear, the second election commissioner, a Democrat, decides to be the adult in the room, and he knows this is going to get adjudicated if they don't certify these returns, and he knows this is over. So he says, I think we should certify these returns based on the results we have, and if anybody has any problem with that, they can sue in court. And if you know Polk County's electoral history with election fraud in court, I got overturned. They never overturn election results yet. That's in volume 2. They're going to, against the GGL, but it wasn't going to happen, so he knew that wasn't going to happen. So finally, Biggs is out of power after 18 years of election fraud and police brutality and graft and undemocratic methods. And it ushered in a new era of the Good Government League, bipartisan group that ruled the county for about 15 years. They certainly had their flaws. There was one political murder and 2 deputies that were murdered. Remember I told you the 1936 murder was a string of murders ending in 1958. That's the end of that, 1958. But Barkley was the leader of that for most of that time, and then a few others were. And then it went back to red team versus blue team in the mid-1960s, and then Polk County still has its problems, sadly. But McMinn County just had the Cantors were an anomaly. It was a Republican county. They were in power 10 years. The GI nonpartisan ticket beat Cantrell, and then by 1948, they're back to red team versus blue team. It's a Republican county again. There's no controversy, no election fraud, no murders. It's peaceful. Polk County did not have that luxury, unfortunately. But it was still better than the Biggs era. Things were starting to turn around, and the Good Government League did a lot to help Barkley didn't just want police to quit killing people that stuck to Biggs. He didn't want them to just quit stealing elections. He wanted to have better roads, better schools. Infrastructure was pitiful. I mean, there's one lady, I think she just turned 90 last year. She said, living under the Biggs machine, was pitiful. I mean, they did not take care of things. They took care of themselves and their homes, but not the county. So that's what Barkley wanted to live when he called, a progressive county. That's what he wanted to do. Meaning, we were going to make progress and be a, legit, not be backwards and all that. So, but this is just a fascinating story, and I think it really just shows you what power does to somebody. This man, he had good qualities. I think most people do, but he got power. He didn't want to let go of it, and he lived well. And I think he just enjoyed having this kind of power over people in the county. And he once said, "I'd rather be sheriff of Polk County than have a seat in Congress." He meant that. He could have made that happen too for himself. He didn't want it though. So he's finally overthrown by bipartisan group, and we've had election fraud in Tennessee has been scant since this era, thankfully. It's non-existent now, thankfully, and we don't have ripper bills anymore. We have home rule, and police are a lot more accountable now, and I just think things have gotten better, but no matter what problems we had today, let's remember it used to be a lot worse. And Biggs is a good example of that. 18 years of misery is over. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I do have books here if you want to. I'll be glad to autograph it for you. If you have any questions or any comments about the Biggs machine or anything Polk County political related historically, be glad to answer that. Thank you. Yes, Warren.
Tyler, I was just curious. I mean, you reflect quite a bit, and just now even about Biggs being obviously a very talented man. And I just wonder, was there a moment you thought, or a series of moments that sort of started him on this path where he had to increasingly, what was the thing that turned him? You know what I mean?
I'm glad to ask that. It's interesting to think about. I think the county's culture of violence, I think, was there before the Biggs era. Just he ramped it up to turned it to 11. But his father was a victim of homicide. It wasn't political, but his father was killed, and he lost some elections, and he had some other tragedies in his life, and I think he saw, again, not just trying to deflect, blame someone else, but I think he saw what was happening with Boss Crump in Memphis. And he saw what Cantor was trying to do in McMinn County, because in Etowah, the Cantors had power before they had power in all of McMinn County. And I think he saw that. But really, maybe if I had to pick a time, the 1916 election, he had a tragedy in his family. He just gotten voted out for the second time. And he was, early 40s, and didn't want to be a police chief in a small town again, didn't want to be a farmer, even when farmers were thriving at the time. So that might have been the turning point. He decided, I'm going to get back into this one day if I get the chance, and I'm not going to let this power go. That's what I think it was. So, if I had to pick.
Been through Benton, of course, probably a couple of hundred times in my life. Going somewhere else, never stop or get off. Is the old jail in his house still there?
The jail is gone. The jail was torn down in the 50s. It's now a fire hall. It's not very big, fire hall, but the house is still there. The house is really nice, actually. Burch Biggs' last daughter-in-law passed away about 6 years ago, and his grandson, who's adopted, I spoke to him once, and I thought he'd be a little chill since he was adopted. He never knew his papa, but no, he was more hardcore than the 90-year-old granddaughter, so I was like, whoa. But he sold the house about 3 years ago, and the guy that bought it flipped it and fixed it up. It wasn't in horrible shape, but he kind of made it nicer. And the current owner bought it about a year and a half ago, and he came to my book signing, and I said, now if you start reading that book, and that book bursts into flame, that's Burch Biggs' ghost, saying he doesn't want you to read that book in his house. But it's still there at the corner of Main Street and Clemmer Ferry Road, which is like basically an alleyway, really narrow road. You can't fit 2 cars on it, so, yeah.
What were some of your impressions as you researched this, or what surprised you about the story?
Well, what surprised me, people's reticence to talk, which I understand. I never pushed anybody, and I certainly didn't push them if I could tell they had for lack of a better term, if they had some sort of PTSD from their childhood, because a lot of people I spoke to were, teenagers, maybe, 10 years old, and a lot of this happened in the 40s. And if it recalled painful memories, I didn't push it. But there were other people who were descendants of those involved. A lot of them spoke to me, but a lot didn't. They were very polite, but it was ingrained in them. Do not discuss this anywhere at any time, And I wouldn't ask them who killed who. I just meant, what do you remember about this? What was it like growing up? You heard about election fraud. What do you remember about the police behavior? What do you remember about, the political atmosphere, that kind of thing? So people's reticence to talk really surprised me since so much time has passed. And I think a lot of that is because they still, excuse me, they still live there. They love the county, and they want to keep peace between neighbors and friends who may have had a papa on the other side. Another thing that surprised me was just how much evidence was out there I didn't think I'd find. I feel fortunate because I had some times where I would call some people and they would say, "Oh yeah, my dad had a diary," or this one lady I asked, "Did your mom write anything down?" She goes, "Actually, she did." I was like, "She did?" Actually wrote some stuff down. And there was a guy 30 years ago who was going to do a book, and obviously never did it, but he had some notes, and his daughter gave that to me, and that was a huge help. And between that and the court records and the newspaper records and some previous work done on a couple of college theses and some memories in people's heads, you just got to bring it all together. And I just couldn't believe that there was enough there to make a book out of after this long. And if I waited 10 more years, a lot of those memories, those people are going to be gone. So that was some of the impressions I got. So, yes.
I'm the daughter of Vance Davis.
Oh yeah.
And near the end of her life, my mother said to me, every time Vance left the house, I didn't know he would come back.
Yep.
He left Polk County in '56 and never went back to Polk County. He was only in Bradley, but he left Polk County.
Yeah, her father, Vance Davis, he's the first Democrat in the party that tried to stand up to Biggs and just didn't have enough support organized at the time. But yeah, that was a common, feeling for a lot of families. A lot of the men who were involved in politics, their families like, don't do it, you're going to get killed. But they thought it was worth it. We want to improve this county. We want to make this a better place, and this is what we have to do. But there was a lot of fear. That's the way to live, and that's the people you got to remember when you're going to hurt the family's feelings. Like, well, what about the families of the victims? What about their feelings too? That's valid. So. All right, if there's no more, again, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.